Welcome back to Face the State on this Sunday morning. Could Connecticut become a destination for marijuana vacations? It could be if marijuana is legalized in our state. And with us today to talk about this, state representatives, two of them. We have Pam Staneski. She represents Milford and Orange. She's a Republican. Juan Candeleria from New Haven. He is a Democrat. And representatives, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'll begin with you, Representative Candeleria, because you believe that the state should legalize marijuana. Why?
Well, I think that when we look at the voters of this state, they're in agreement that this should be the law. And we need to address the issue of the social impact that this has on our communities. And I think that's the bigger question that we need to tackle. This is affecting our youth, and we need to ensure that we take it away from the hands of our youth. And the way we're going to do that is if we regulate it as a state.
Representative Staneski, you're opposed to legalizing recreational marijuana.
I am, and there's 2 points that I'd like to make with that. I respect the representative's conversations on saying that if this does go forward in his plan, that we will address a myriad of concerns around youth and access. But the second piece is that if we're looking at legalizing marijuana to fix our budget problems, we just only need to look to our friends in Colorado, where the revenues are not this year, maybe not even going to match what they need to cover their regulatory issues, or their structure that they have put in place.
You know, I have a mechanical question. Should it be legalized? How would it work exactly? What would the age limit be? Would you be able to smoke on a city street, or would you have to go to a certain place to smoke it? Could you buy it at stores? How would it work?
Well, the way that the language that I'm thinking in my mind that's being structured is that you have to be 21 and over, first of all, to buy it. Currently, we have a structure in place, right? We have the dispensaries currently, and what we'll utilize the dispensary as the first, but we'll develop so that there's business opportunities for others to also enter the market. That is maybe towards storefronts, but that will be part of the language of the bill. How do we expand it? How do we get there? So that's how I envision that bill working.
So you don't envision picking it up at the checkout counter at the Big Y?
No, not at all. I think
or behind the counter at Walgreens?
Exactly, not at all. The way we regulate alcohol, we should be regulating marijuana. I think it's going to be, when we talk about regulation, it's going to be a stronger regulation, right? And the other thing that I think is important to mention is the reason we need to regulate it is because what's being sold out there is being laced with a lot of different chemicals that are harming our youth. And we need to tackle that issue.
So
you're both in agreement that people are smoking marijuana in our state currently. It's out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. But nobody's knocking on somebody's door who's growing a plant and saying, hey, we're going to arrest you. And I think the representative brings up a lot of good points, and I appreciate that he heard me on the floor of the House 2 years ago when we debated this, bring up the issues around the social piece. Whether it comes or not, this is not the time for it because we're broke. We can't afford to put in a regulatory structure to regulate this to the point that I believe the good representative agrees with me that we need to make sure that our youth are safe. Just Hartford, saw emergency room visit last night for a bunch of high school kids who overdosed on edibles, brownies, too much THC, didn't realize the impact of that. So those are costs. So in order for us to put this in and regulate it, the OFA is actually saying that the first year cost, now this wouldn't even be implemented for 3 years, fully implemented, the first year cost is $15 million. I'm looking at my cities and my towns that are saying don't cut our municipal aid, and yet we're wanting to put another piece in. And then I go back to what I said originally. When we look at Colorado, they had a huge boom in use and in tax revenue because they were taxing at about 29–30%. They found that actually increased the cartel, the black market, because they weren't taxing it. And so they lowered the tax rate there. Sinking tax revenue equals sinking, sinking usage equals sinking tax revenue. The price is lowering. And so I asked the good representative, if we regulate this and we tax it and we want to pay for this, and everybody's using this and we don't get enough revenue, are we then going to encourage more people to use this?
Is there a type of legalization, perhaps not as broad as Representative Candelaria has talked about, that you would be comfortable with and some of your colleagues?
Well, so
maybe a limited use or something? A
little background. I started a prevention council in our hometown, Milford, the Milford Prevention Council, working on substance abuse and underage drinking. I'm not adverse to being at the table. to talk about the social issues. You know, we all agree that science says that the young brain does not finish developing until 26, and repeated use of marijuana in ages 16, 17, 18 can actually impact that frontal cortex. I do think that there's the issues around drug driving. I go back again to the experiment in Colorado, where this last year, the chief of police association came to the legislature and says, look, we need help in our municipalities because we don't have enough police force to just go out and say whether or not it is a valid grow or an invalid grow. So on the social aspect, I need children to be protected. On the fiscal aspect, I don't think we can afford this at this time. Energy regulation, regulation around who gets it, regulation on whether or not we're going to tax wholesale or retail. Those are all things that I think are years down the road once we get our fiscal house in order.
Representative Candeleria, what do we know about the typical marijuana smoker in Connecticut? You mentioned youngsters and children and teenagers and things like that, but I'm sure there are people in all age groups who are smoking it illegally, recreational in their homes.
Yes, there's a number of them that are smoking it, and actually we don't know what they're smoking. And to the good point of the representative is that that's the reason why we need to regulate it, is so that we don't have the incidents that we have with those youth in Hartford, because we'll know as a state the potency, the levels of THC of the product, and we'll be able to control it. So answering your question, there's some that use it on a daily basis, there's some that use it socially, right? So the black market is being fed by users in the state of Connecticut, and if we don't do anything, the ones that are benefiting out of this is the drug cartels, are the drug dealers. That's why it's so critical that we regulate it today and not wait into the future to do something.
Well, the reason I asked you this is because there's this image out there that, you know, perhaps a stereotype of the typical marijuana smoker, someone who perhaps is unemployed, living in their parents' basement, smoking pot out the basement window. But you're saying that it's all socioeconomic levels, people smoking?
I think it's at all levels. I don't think it's just one specific group. I think that it depends on the individual. It depends, you know, their social surroundings, who are their friends, if they do it in the household. So there's a lot of determinants to that.
Do you think it's going to pass? Yes or no?
I do not know if that debate's going to come forward. This is short session, and it's usually around budgetary pieces. So if we're looking to fix the fiscal crisis in Connecticut on the backs of our marijuana smokers, I do not think it will pass.
Representative Candeleria, you think it's going to happen this year?
I'm optimistic. At least I would like to get it all the way to the floor so that we can have a real debate on the issue. I don't think we haven't had that debate, and the voters of Connecticut deserve that.
We thank you so much for being with us. Pam Staneski, Juan Candeleria, state representatives both. Thanks again. Have a great Sunday. When we come back, we will talk about the impact the budget crisis in our state is having on cities and towns, and how are they dealing with the problems created by the Connecticut economic downturn. And I welcome your comments either on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. You can find me on any of those social media venues. We'll be right back.